Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Yes! Happy Tuesday, everyone. Dan Kent and myself, Shawna Boren, would like to welcome you to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration from the Sunday sermon.
That's right. That's right.
Check that out, Dan. We do. We continue that conversation, and sometimes it's a doozy. And so, Dan, I would love for you, before you get into your summary, before we, start chatting and going down rabbit trails or whatever we end up doing today, we are still in cross-examination, correct?
Correct.
But this is kind of one of those sub-series within the series, within the larger Sermon on the Mount series. So can you just kind of lay that out for people a little more?
So we're in the Sermon on the Mount series, and it's kind of like Inception, if you've ever seen that movie Inception, where they go into somebody's dream, but in order to get the information they want, they have to go into a dream that's inside of the dream, and then go into a dream that's even deeper still. And that's sort of what this is like. We're doing this big series on the Sermon on the Mount, but within that, we're looking at this passage in Matthew 7, right toward the end, not quite at the end, but really close to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus talks about judgment. And then within that, now we've talked about judgment. Do not judge. Don't focus on the speck in your neighbor's eye, but look at the log in your own. We've talked about all of that. But what needs to be said, though, is that if I'm not going to judge, I still have this compulsion. I have this need for justice. And so it seems like this compulsion to judge is related to this need for justice. So how do I live with this kind of contradiction inside of myself? Well, the answer to that is that we have to kind of know our role, know our place. That we have a lot of things that we're supposed to do. We're supposed to reflect the Father's love. We're supposed to reflect God's love into the world in for ourselves, for each other, and for the earth and the animal kingdom. But the role of judgment belongs to God. And so in order for us to not judge, we have to outsource that role to God, and with the trust that God can judge adequately and meet this need for justice that we have. Well, so in order to trust this, in order to outsource this, we really have to trust that. So we're going to be spending a few weeks looking at God's judgment and what that means to say that God judges, and how that should, I think, ultimately give us the confidence in God's ability to judge, so that we don't feel the compulsion to judge one another, and we can just trust that God will judge and bring justice in a way that satisfies that deep need for us. And I think that's the best I can do on that.
Is there a title for this sub series?
There's not. It's still cross-examination. It's just that, on one hand, we're told not to judge, but rather we're supposed to love, and so we're supposed to look at each other through the lens of the cross, and we don't examine people as judges. We examine them through the love that God demonstrates on the cross. Mm-hmm. Well, okay. But at some point, God is going to judge us and everyone through the lens of the cross also, to see how much we cohere with the love that's demonstrated on the cross. And so maybe you could separate it this way, where so far we've talked about cross-examination, and now we're going to be talking about being cross-examined. And so that's how you might be able to take a look at it. I guess that's the best I can say about that.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Me, I always forget titles, and I thought there was something that. Well, you are the title master. So
we played around with it, but we ended up just sticking with this. So
okay,
did
I dream sleight of hand? Did I dream that, or was that really?
Shawna, you are you are giving peeks behind the curtain that I don't think we're supposed to give. So. All right.
That's
okay.
I'm gonna. Folks.
No, we've gone too far now. We have to talk about this.
We have to do it. Okay.
This is the inner workings, and so basically, we were going to do a different title, except it was so last minute that we didn't have time to do all of the the media and stuff. And so that's where we're like, well, this sort of is still cross-examination. And so we kind of basically the little sales pitch that I just gave is sort of what we determined. And so the concern was, it seems sort of sleight of hand that that we're just trying to keep using this same title, and we're trying to find a way to get this new series under this old title. And so the joke was, well, we're just doing sleight of hand here. And at first it did seem that way, but I really do think that this is the right title, because I do think that this is part of the same theme.
You know, Dan, I really believe part of my calling, why I am on this earth in this particular time, is to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, that's right.
Just to throw you curveballs.
Man, you need a raise, because you are doing a great job.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. Well, that's good to know. So cross-examination plus. That's what this is. No sleight of hand here. I do like, though, that we are spending some time talking about this aspect of judgment, because you're right. So many people, when we've talked about our role is not to judge, I think some of the pushback and some of the what about is really about justice, like justice being done when wrongs are committed and people are mistreated. Like that's what folks are longing for. And so I'm glad that we're kind of taking a little turn, a little curve in the journey. And we'll dissect some of this. So all of that to say, Sermon 1, kind of the intro to this part of the series, cross-examination, underneath the umbrella of Sermon on the Mount. Greg started that this week. It's the end of the world as you know it. What an uplifting title. I just keep thinking of that song anyway, I'm dating myself. Anyway.
REM.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I was, yes.
Yeah,
loved it. It's a great song. And I feel fine. So anyway, Greg started out this part of the series. It's the end of the world as you know it. And so I'm going to now kick it over to you, Dan, for the summary, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion.
Okay, but first, let me just ask you a question, because I've noticed something. I feel like I feel really big, and I think it's because you are farther away from your camera than normal. Is that right?
So I got a different setup, and yes, I would say my monitor is further away. I'm not doing it on my laptop. I'm doing it on a desktop. Is it bad? Do I need to change?
No, it's not bad. You look small, and I can see more of your office, which is kind of cool. And I can see more things. And so when I watch with everybody at 4:00, I'm going to start to read. I'm going to read what books you have and stuff like that.
Yep. That's good. Well, maybe I'll change them up from week to week.
That's a good idea. Although, however, it does make me feel like I'm like this, So.
You're not. You look the same. Actually, Dan, I'm shrinking. I'm losing so much weight and height. I'm just getting smaller and smaller.
The incredible shrinking woman.
Okay, I'm going to come forward. Oh, that's too close for me. But okay, I'm going to come forward.
No, you look good. It does. It looks fine. It looks fine.
Okay.
But Greg's sermon, The End of the World as We Know It. And he really starts off with this question, this need that we have for justice. And he just points out that, and I think this is a good way to start it. He points out the futility of chasing justice, even though we need to pursue justice for sure. But having expectations that the world will be just is a fool's errand. Obviously, we are called to bring justice and to fight for justice. But the expectation can really break our heart if we expect some type of heavenly utopia to be on earth, because it's not going to. And really, and this is why I think, you talked about the kickoff of this new sub-series. Really, Emily kicked off the series the week before, because she talked about the long defeat, and she talked about what do we do in the face of a world where we're not going to get this justice that we all long for. And so really, I think the reason why that's a good way to start it is because it really shows that trusting God for justice isn't this absurd thing. I mean, because the absurd thing is assuming that we're going to bring, we're going to make the world just, because that's just not going to happen. But our only hope really is in the justice that God will bring. And so he took a look at what exactly is God's justice like, and he really kind of talked about how the attitude that the disciples and Jesus sort of had when Jesus walked the earth with them was that they were anticipating that God was going to bring closure. God was going to reveal everything the way it really is, and he was going to, in other words, balance the scales, bring justice, bring about the shalom that the prophets and God's people for 1,000 years had been anticipating. And so he took a look at like what is this final judgment? What is this kind of what's apocalyptic kind of vision that Jesus had? And so he looked at Matthew 24, where he said that you'll know when the time is going to come, when there are wars and rumors of wars and pestilence and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting because he shares these very scary things. And, wars and rumors of wars and disease and all of that. And it's like, well, that's scary. And the idea that God is going to bring justice and kind of end the world as we know it inherently sounds very scary, because this is what we're familiar with. And yet the disciples all seemed eager for this event. They seemed to long for this event. In fact, they were becoming sort of impatient. Even then, in First Peter, 3, how long, O Lord? How long? What's taking so long for this? And Peter kind of replies by saying, well, from God's perspective, it's not that long. And you're talking like 30 years after the death of Jesus, and they're already getting impatient. And of course, you can't help but think, you just wait. You don't know anything yet about, being patient. And so, Jesus talks about like it's going to come, and you should be prepared, and you should be ready. And he starts to give these prophecies, and it's interesting because on one hand, it can be discouraging, because it seems like a lot of the prophecies that were given both by Jesus and by John sort of occurred with the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And yet the early church after that still anticipated this fulfillment, this coming. And so what do we do with that? And really, I think I guess what I would say is that really the question here is that it seems like Jesus is telling us to be ready for this kind of cataclysmic event that's going to change the world as we know it. And the question is what do we do with that? And let's see, he kind of talked about a lot of stuff here. So I think what I would say is that boy, I'm sorry, I lost my place.
That's all right.
Okay. So basically, what do we do with that? And he just kind of talks about really kind of continuing to love and continuing to get ready. He talks about the parables of the virgins and how some of them were ready and some of them weren't. And so that's what we need to do, is we need to be ready. We have to learn, I think, what it was about this that made the disciples long for it. And so that's and he kind of gets at this in a few different ways. He talks about how we have to recognize how temporary everything is. And I think that really applies when we consider the things that we idolize and we put all of our hope in, that tends to be sort of vacuous, and it never really fulfills that hope. And there's nothing in this world, I think, that can fulfill the hope and the longings that we have other than God. And so as we get closer to the end here, it just becomes that much more important to make sure that we have our trust and our hope and our expectations all in the right basket. And he says in his sermon, Greg talks about how, look, where are you going to put your hope? Where are you choosing to hope? Because the world inherently is hopeless. Even if we all saying kumbaya together, the world is still going to burn out eventually. Everything here is temporary. And so our only hope is that there is something that is not temporary, that there is something that is somehow necessary, or something that grounds all of this temporary stuff that will come in and fulfill these longings that we have. And so it becomes imperative that we put our trust in the right place. You know, he talked about a lot of other stuff, but I think that's sort of where we'll be. He's really laying the groundwork for what he's going to talk about in the future. But I really, let me just say this too before I kick it back to you. He talked about, you know, he's talking about this end times. He's talking about this apocalypse, and he's talking about people who, you know, they think that, you know, Henry Kissinger is the Antichrist, and, you know, the computers are a sign of the end times, and we only have 10 years until Jesus comes back, and they start, you know, mapping out these dates and everything like that. And I really appreciated Greg, because he kind of rejects that whole sort of endeavor. But I really appreciated that he confessed that he has been too hard on people who do that, because on one hand, even though he disagrees with that whole approach, he admires them for kind of being ready and orienting themselves to the potential that this could all end any given moment. And I appreciated that Greg kind of confessed that he had been kind of had that bad attitude about that. And it just modeling that confession, I just thought was sort of it wasn't technically part of the sermon, but it was so valuable, and I appreciated that. So what did you think of the sermon?
Yeah, I think that I too have had to re-examine my perspective on those who do that, those who try to like pinpoint on the calendar exactly when Christ is going to return. And so I think there's nothing wrong with staying awake and being ready, like Greg said. Like and I think that was part of his confession, to say he kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, we need to be anticipating with expectation. Like, we need to be looking forward to the coming of Christ, because what that will mean is everything becomes new. Everything becomes aligned. Everything is like filled with his glory. Everything, you know, there will be no more hurting, no more suffering, no more pain, you know, all of the things. Like Greg's, the way he put it was, every square inch of the cosmos will be defined by God's love. And that's something glorious to look forward to. And so that this was a good reminder about that. It also caused me to, like I said, reevaluate kind of my perspective and maybe my thought process towards those who are a bit more meticulous with the predictions. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when everyone thought the Lord was coming back in the 80s, and when everyone thought Y2K was going to be the end, you know, like, and I think there's nothing wrong with being ready. I think where it kind of can get off kilter, in my opinion, is when, like Greg said, like, you start to cash out your 401ks for those who have them, or you start to stockpile things so that you will be ready to go in case, you know, Armageddon happens and there's like a slight delay in your rapture. So I don't know why people do that, or think that they've got to, you know, berate people into salvation because, you know, I think that's where it kind of gets off kilter. And I think because of those caricatures, then people tend to just go to the whole thing, and that's not good either. So Again, trying to find that balance, and it leads me to ask you a question, Dan.
All right,
be ready. Okay,
I'm ready.
My question for you is there seems to be an either or with this. It seems to be either plotting meticulously and trying to look for all the signs and all of the things to pinpoint Christ's return, or just a total, like, that is just total nonsense. Why do you think it's so hard to balance, like to balance that? Why is it so hard to like walk in the tension of either or, but like something more balanced? Which, and I'm struggling to say balance because today that can be such a bad word, but do you get what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, I'm just kind of curious, why does it have to be one or the other? Is there a different approach to looking toward the return of Christ with anticipation and
Yeah.
joy, like Greg talked about.
Yeah. I think this is something that we have to kind of be mindful of too as we go forward in the series. But I think kind of like what I don't even want to say fear, but like a warning is kind of like money. Like you take 10 people and you give them each $1 million, and you'll find 5 of those people their lives will get better, and 5 of those people their lives will get wrecked. And the same thing is true with the warning. If you warn that something big is happening, some people that causes them to focus and it causes them to get better, and for some people that causes them, it amplifies their selfishness or their greed or whatever. And so I think that's sort of, it's so individual specific about how people are going to receive this, and that's not a reason not to do it. It's because sometimes if you are given a warning and you're one of those people who you want to suddenly hoard everything and be selfish, and those are characteristics that were always in you, and now they're just being exposed, and that could be a good thing. And C.S. Lewis talked about the best thing for a coward is to get into a dangerous situation so that they can see their cowardice. And he talks about how there's a lot of soldiers that went to war who thought they were brave, but as soon as they got to war, they realized that they were a coward, and that was good because they learned something about themselves, and now they could face it and they could deal with it. And I think things like talking about the apocalypse, talking about the return of Christ, and all of these things, I think can serve the same function. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but it adds like decorations to the question, to the problem.
Well, what it does is it kind of gives some backstory to the why of why people seem to go this way or that way. And yeah, I think that makes sense, that who you are, your character, is going to shine forth in those times of pressure. So along those same lines, we have had the question come our way about, okay, so if the end is near, and I don't know that we said that the end is near, but right. If the end is near, then why even try? Like, what's it all worth? Why not just throw your hands up and sit back and eat peanut M&Ms and drink root beer?
Yeah. Oh man.
I added that last part.
I'm suddenly kind of turned on by this idea. I kind of like this. Maybe we could. Yeah. I think on one hand, if there is no God, and if it's all going to end, then it makes sense. And this is sort of why I think faith matters, is because if there is no God, then it's just prudent to take care of yourself, to hoard resources, to maybe get one last game of poker in. I mean, who knows? Whatever it is that you want to do, that just makes sense. But with God, and when you're part of this bigger kind of vision and this bigger sort of plan that God has for us, then that suddenly doesn't make sense. And I guess what I would say is that, and we are going to talk about this in the series going forward too, but and this is sort of like, this is an idea that I'm working on and I'm kind of hammering out the details on, but I think that it's actually more important to apply ourselves and to throw ourselves into discipleship and into godly tasks, because the escalation of the world and all of the things that Jesus warns about, it makes the virtues more important, not less important. So for example, if you are frugal, if you are responsible with your resources, you may not really know that in a time of abundance. But when times get tight, that's when those virtues become a lot more obvious and a lot more important. And likewise, let's just say that the end is near, and again, like Greg said, we could be at the beginning of another 10,000 years of prosperity and whatever. But, if the end is near, well, then it's just that much more important to heal relationships with your family members. It's not less important. It's more important to do that. And so that's sort of my response to that, is that the potential for the end being soon increases the need to improve and to become more virtuous.
Yeah, I think along those same lines, first of all, like I said, we didn't say, and no one can know when the end truly is here, right? Like until it's here. Like you just don't know. And I don't think, and we're not in the prediction game. And I'm pretty sure, Dan, you won't hear us say, mark your calendar. No, like that's not what we're doing. But to live in anticipation, because we do know at one day, maybe in our lifetime, maybe not, we don't know. One day there will be a new heaven and new earth established. One day Jesus will set all things right. And that's something to, like I said, to anticipate and to rejoice and to long for. I don't think that communicates to, at least in my opinion, to any believer that, well, then just sit back and wait for that day to come. Because in the meantime, whether it's a day, a week, a month, a year, or 10,000 years, like Greg said, in the meantime, there's still darkness in the world. In the meantime, there's still an enemy. There are still powers and principalities that are influencing. There are still things that are out of sync with God's love and character. And so as long as that's true, and as long as we are here, like we should be pushing against that and trying to bring those pockets of light into the areas of darkness. And so I don't see it as a reason or an excuse or even a desire just to like throw up my hands. It's like, well, there's still work to be done. Like until there's still work to be done. And I think the more love we can put out into the world, the better it will be until the ultimate better comes. If that makes sense.
I think that's right. No, I think that's right. Yep. Yeah. Amen. Hey, I will say this though. I will say, mark your calendar for August 12th to the 14th for our summer get together. So if we make it that far, I mean, that's a few days. Knows? So
who knows? Or what if it happened during that weekend?
Well, that would be
together. There you go.
All I ask is that the good Lord Jesus waits until after I defeat Danny Churchill in beanbag tossed before he does anything spectacular. That's all I ask.
That's all you need. You need some redemption there, don't you,
right.
Dan?
That's right.
Dan, you had a question come your way about prophecy.
Mm.
Does this feel like a good, or do we want to save that? Okay, let's do it. Yeah. Oh, you want me to ask it?
Oh, I can. Yeah, I can ask it.
I can ask it. We are such a professional situation here. Okay, I got it. What did Greg mean about prophecy being like mountains?
Yeah. Basically, that's an illustration that seminary professors have used, and I know my professor Ferris, who I took, I think the class was called Prophets from, but basically it's kind of like this. Sure. When you look at a mountain range, you see like mountains in front, and then there's mountains behind, and then there's mountains behind those. And when you look at it, it looks like the mountains behind are close to the mountains in front, and they might be, but they also could be 100 miles behind the mountain in front. And so prophecy is a lot like that, where in the Old Testament, a lot of the prophecies for Jesus, for instance, Isaiah actually meant for his time and place. He was making prophecies about current kings and current political situations that came true in his life. And so those would be like the mountains in front, but they also echoed and they applied to future situations, which would be the mountains behind, which could be hundreds of years later. And so that's sort of what prophecy is like. So Jesus, when he prophesies, wars and destruction, he might have been immediately meaning to apply that to the fall of Jerusalem, but it also applies to us that we need to be ready and we need to be watching for signs of the end. In the same way that you look at the fig tree to look at signs of summer, so too we need to look for signs of the end of the world as we know it. And it's possible that that has happened multiple times. Even before the ultimate end, we might end up with this huge shift in how the world works. And we've seen that in history, where just these radical alterations in the world, and Jesus warns us to always be ready for that, and then ultimately always be ready for the ultimate end. So it applies to that first set of mountains, and it applies to the mountains after and the mountains after that, and so that's sort of what Greg meant by that.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Thank you for laying that out. And it's perspective, right? Because what may be true for, say, the first set of mountains doesn't discount or make untrue the next set of mountains. And the next set of mountains that seem to be so close don't discount and make untrue the previous set. It's like,
That's right.
You know what I mean? It's perspective and time and place, and many things can be true many times.
That's right.
Look at us. We're just we're just putting it all out there. Which brings us to, guess what, Dan?
Is it Nugget Time?
It's Nugget Time.
Uh-oh. Wow.
You don't get to say you don't have one.
I don't.
You want me to go
one.
first?
Yeah, you go first.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I would just say, again, this was just kind of Greg laying the framework and the foundation for what's coming up the next few weeks. Whatever camp you find yourself falling in, whether you are one that is fearful about a possible end coming, or if you're one that is anticipates and looks for joy about the end coming, possibly when we don't know, or if you're like somewhere in between, like, I just want to encourage us all to know that in the end, Jesus will rule and reign. In the end, love does conquer all. And I just don't think that's something to be fearful of. And in fact, having that in my viewpoint, in my mind, makes me better able to release some of those judgments and calls for justice that I just so desperately want to see here and now. I trust that ultimately God is a good judge. I trust that ultimately, and by good, he's just. And he knows the full picture. He knows what we don't know. He knows the ins and the outs, the backwards and the forwards of everything. And so I trust that to him. That's not my job. And I feel okay with that. In the meantime, I'm here to do what he calls me to do, what he puts before me, what he puts before me, what he puts before me. And I think if you live, not that I'm saying be like me, I'm just saying if you live in a life where you recognize your place in the world, your place in the kingdom, your place to help shine that light, when you live that way, we don't really need to fear. We don't need to fear because the end will come when it comes. And when it does come, there'll be pain for some, for all of us who, like, as we're getting those things burned away that aren't compatible with his character. But ultimately, just think, no more hurt, no more pain, no more anger, no more violence, no more hunger, like all of the things that we concern ourselves with now that are very, very real. All of that is gone because everything will be covered and defined by God's love. I think that's pretty cool.
That's awesome. I don't think I can really offer much beyond that. Maybe I'll offer something to support that because
I filibustered for you, Dan.
Yeah,
so
no, that's good. Well, I was enraptured by what you were saying, so I didn't have time to think.
Okay.
But I'll say this to support what you're saying. I think that when you look at a few different things, trusting in God and having peace about a potential end times makes sense. On one hand, you have, the fact that we can't, like, what are your expectations? Do you expect that the world will continue to progress and get better and better and better? Well, that doesn't make any sense because, just how physics works and there's only so many resources and all that kind of stuff, that there really is no ultimate hope. There might be short-term hope in the world, but there's not really ultimate hope in the world. But at the same time, love does last. And I think what's really interesting to me is that pursuing the virtues just makes so much sense because vices are inherently finite and virtues are inherently infinite. And what I mean by that is, like, when you consider this, for instance, let's say you're an accountant at a corporation and you decide to start embezzling money from the corporation. And there's maybe 5 accountants at this company and you're embezzling money. Well, first of all, there's only so much you can embezzle. Secondly, only so many of the accountants can embezzle because there's only so much money to embezzle. And so there's a limit there. So that's a vice. But now when you look at a virtue, when you look at things like charity and when you look at things like love, well, there is no limit to how many people can love. There's no limit to how much you can love. It's exponential. It's just there's so much more potential there, whereas the potential for evil and suffering is always finite. It's always limited. And I think that mathematically, when you stretch that out over the cosmos, you stretch that out over eternity, you see that our only ultimate hope and the only real wise thing to do is to love and to throw ourselves into virtues. Mathematically, that's the only thing that ultimately makes sense. And that is what I have to say about that.
Well, there you have it, folks. All right, you guys, listen, come see us this weekend, August 12th, 13th, 14th. It's a full weekend of activities. It's a summer get-together. Come and get together with us. Dan will be there. You may have to like pump him up for his big beanbag toss game. Right. Who knows? Q&A is going to be great. Music Fest is going to be great. Service and baptism is going to be great. We'd love to see you there. If you can't make it, that's all right. Make sure you continue to tune in and circle back with us as we continue the conversation. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.